The world is reorganizing, not slowly, not theoretically, but right now, while we are having the same conversations inside American frameworks, the world is building new power centers, new economic systems, new alliances that do not require American approval to exist. And Black Americans who have spent generations fighting for citizenship, for rights, for recognition within American systems are caught between two worlds and at the risk of losing ground in both. And the question that I want to sit with today is not whether this shift is happening, because it is. The question is whether we are moving with it or whether we will look up in 10 years and realize that we were the last ones waiting on a system that had already been replaced. Now, if you are new here, I want to welcome you. I'm Jice Johnson. I'm a business strategist and an economic developer. And on this channel, we talk about business, leadership, and global politics, and why you cannot understand any one of them without the other two. And if this conversation is for you, I want to encourage you to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone in your circle who needs to be thinking about this. So let's get into it. I want to start by giving us this picture, right? Because the world is moving. The US dollar is losing its dominance as the global reserve currency. And to be clear, for me, it's not certain whether or not they're doing it on purpose or not. I think that depends on who you're following. But what I can tell you is that this is not a French position, that this is what the numbers are showing. And BRICS, which is an economic bloc that began as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have now expanded to 11 full members. Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia have all joined. And more than 30 nations are waiting at the door. So this bloc now represents nearly half of the world's population and more than 40% of global GDP by purchasing power. They are building payment systems that are designed to bypass the dollar and the SWIFT network entirely. And they are literally not asking America for permission. African countries are diversifying their partnerships away from Western frameworks towards Russia, towards China, and others. And the African Continental Free Trade Area creates a market of 1.3 billion people across 54 countries. The Global South is not waiting for America to fix itself either before it moves on. And the clearest example of what sovereign intentional building looks like right now is in West Africa with the AES. That's the alliance of the Sahel states. It's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They're building sovereignty entirely out of Western frameworks. They're not negotiating with them, not appealing to them, and they are building without them. So this is the world as it stands here in 2026. It's moving. And the question is, where do we stand when it does? So it was W.E.B. Du Bois who named this back in 1903, double consciousness, the sense of always looking at yourself through the eyes of others and of measuring your soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. A world of being Black and American when those two identities pull in different directions. Now, he named this in 1903, and I wrestle with this today in 2026, but I recognize that the stakes are different. And so just stick with me here for a second, because Black Americans have fought for citizenship in this country. We fought for civil rights. We fought for the right to vote, to own property, and to exist as full human beings within American frameworks. And that fight was real. And that fight was necessary. And the people who waged that fight were heroic by all accounts. However, those frameworks are becoming less relevant on the global stage. And so what happens when being an American becomes a liability in the global South and not an asset? What happens when the power that Black Americans spent generations trying to access starts to mean less outside of these borders and it starts to mean less inside of these borders? What happens when the systems that we demanded inclusion in are no longer the systems that are in control of the world? And we need to consider this because we have been conditioned to see America as the ceiling and the floor of what's possible. And my question is, what if it's neither? So we should be clear about the empire that we're sitting in, right? So let's get specific about that. What does this empire look like right now? Because I think that it matters for what comes next. The US spends over $950 billion on its military. And to put that into perspective, we know it's an overkill. That's more than the next 6 countries combined. There are between 750 to 800 military bases in 80 countries around the globe. Britain, France, Russia, and China combined have fewer than 50. We have spent $8 trillion on post 9/11 wars, wars that were built on false pretenses, wars that destabilize entire regions, wars that send Black Americans, including myself, to die in foreign countries. Fortunately for me, I came back alive. While those same countries have cut our social programs and defunded schools and let our communities deteriorate. We should note that that money has never come to our communities, and that those bases were never built to protect us, and that those wars were never fought based off of our permission, and they have not delivered our liberation. And this is the empire that we are being asked to stay loyal to. This is the structure that we are being asked to or told to work within. And even as it projects military power across the globe, interfering in places like Greenland and Venezuela and Cuba and Gaza, its economic dominance is beginning to slip. And the world is responding to that slippage by demanding something else. And I would assert that we too should be building something else. And so I think it would help, again, in the framing of this, right, in terms of where we are now, is to really understand where we've come from. Because since the 1820s, 1823 to be exact, the US claimed the entire Western Hemisphere as its sphere of influence. This is the Monroe document. It's been brought up many times. And this basically stated that there was to be no European interference in the Americas. And what that really meant is that there was no interference with American dominance over the Americas, over Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean. And so for 200 years, there have been US coups, economic control, political intervention across the entire hemisphere. And Black and brown bodies across these nations have been managing American dominance their entire existence as sovereign states. As this dominance continues to weaken, it opens up something, right? The countries that have spent 2 centuries navigating American interference are now beginning to navigate something different. Some of them are moving towards BRICS and global South networks that are repositioning themselves as the power structures change. This is not just like a geopolitical story. There is an opening that's taking place, and I believe that there is a space for us in that opening. But what we need to be able to understand is that the African diaspora is not waiting on this conversation. Caribbean communities, African immigrants, Pan-Africanists, they are already building connections to the continent. They are already positioning themselves inside of BRICS economies. They are already creating the relationships and the trade pipelines that are going to matter when this shift completes. So they're not waiting for America. They're moving towards Africa and the global South. And while that window is opening or is open, while these relationships are being formed, Black Americans are caught between these two positions, continuing to demand repair from a declining empire or building with the rising global South. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I think that this can be done simultaneously. I think this is a both and conversation. We should pursue what is owed to us here, right? And we should build what's needed at the same time. But we have to be intentional about both. And right now, I don't believe that we are as intentional about the global side as this moment really requires. So I want to talk about what's kind of not necessarily driving, but an aspect of these two different directions, right? This is going to bring me to very clearly naming specifically FBA, maybe ADOS, but definitely for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, FBA. Foundational Black Americans is attempting to isolate Black Americans from the diaspora connections in the moment that we probably need them the most, right? And their argument is that they're almost arguing that we're not African. And I can't even wrap my head around that one. But they're also arguing, their argument is for Black Americans to focus in on reparations and not to look to Africa, to essentially reject the diaspora solidarity completely. That Black Americans are a distinct and separate group, and that and our interests are not aligned with the broader African diaspora. For me, this is like a source of real frustration. The reparations demand is legitimate, and I think that the prescriptions that are taking place right now is what's dangerous, right? There was a Carnegie Mellon research paper that essentially concluded that FBA messaging tactics very closely resemble right-wing disinformation patterns, including those previously used by foreign actors to suppress Black voter turnout. So the timing of this wedge, I don't think is accidental. It is driving albeit a fringe fracture, but a fracture nonetheless between Black Americans and the diaspora at the exact moment when Pan-African consolidation could really change this equation. And so what if America cannot or will not, what if America, I want to phrase that right. What if America will not pay? What if our power is not in demanding from a declining empire, but instead our power comes from with building with the rising global South? What if the isolation of the FBA movement, or what the FBA movement is pushing, is not really strategic solidarity, but instead it ends up being strategic limitation? Right. And I think that we need to sit with those questions. I think we need to be willing to sit with those questions. And so this is going to bring me to talk about this word reparations. And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to try to temper myself, because even as I was researching this, I got angry. And then if y'all follow me, y'all know that I can get very passionate about this. So just a heads up, because I'm going to try to be cool. But the entire thought of this angers me, right? Like, I think we need to talk about the word reparations, because again, this is something happening right now. And I don't think we're angry enough about it. The Trump administration has just finalized a deal. A 1 and this, because this number is intentional, a $1.776 billion compensation fund. Truth and Justice Commission to pay people who claim the Biden administration weaponized the government against them. We're talking about January 6th insurrectionists. We're talking about Trump allies. We're talking about the people who stormed the Capitol, who were held legally accountable for it and are now being told that they need to be made whole. Made whole. And the IRS, as a part of this deal, is now permanently legally barred from ever examining Donald Trump's past tax returns. Not paused, not delayed, but forever barred. And I hope to God that there is some pathway to overturning this bullshit and fuckery. But this country, this is what this country does when violent white racists are called into account. They do not accept accountability. They demand repair. And I need you to understand that this is not new. This is not a Trump invention. This is the oldest play in this country's history. When Lincoln signed the Emancipation Act in 1862, the law that essentially ended slavery, right? Slave holders received up to $300 for every enslaved person that they freed, right? There was a commission that was set up. Petitions were heard. Payments were made. Do we see the pattern? The slaveholders got reparations. The enslaved got nothing but their release from this legal bondage, their freedom, which should have never been taken. That was what was offered as the full payment. So today, even today, as we talk about reparations, as far as they're concerned, we are free. This is the full payment that was offered to us, was freedom. Freedom. I have to keep saying it in air quotes because I just can't bring myself to not. In Britain in 1833, when they abolished slavery across their empire, the government paid 20 million pounds to slaveholding families. I didn't even do the calculation. I don't know, somebody do it and drop it in the comments, but 20 million pounds back in the 1800s. Can you imagine what that is today? 20 million pounds to compensate them for the loss of their property. And the enslaved received nothing. And those formerly enslaved were still forced to continue working as so-called apprentices for years after the abolition, right? Still paying for their freedom and still paying with their labor. William Garrison said that he said this in 1833. If compensation is to be given at all, it should be given to the outraged and guiltless slaves, not to those who have plundered and abused them. That is a direct quote. That was 1833. They did not listen then. They are not listening now. The pattern has never changed. When white men in this country face accountability for slavery, for insurrection, for corruption, the response is always the same. I am the victim. Compensate me for what your justice cost me. They do this with golden parachutes to CEOs who tanked companies. And now they are using the word reparations to do it. The same word we have been fighting to attach to a 400-year debt of stolen labor, of stolen bodies, of stolen land, and stolen generations. And I understand that the actual word has a definition, which is why we're using it. But at this point, it also has a cultural relevance. And America just denied on the global stage that slavery was even the global atrocity that it was when there was a specific call to consider how reparations would play a role in repairing the damage and making whole the people who were impacted. So the fact that they are attaching this word to insurrectionists who were prosecuted for breaking the law is not accidental. It is a theft of language and of moral weight and of our demand. And so here's where I land. Because I want to be honest with you about where I believe that we are. The reparations demand for Black Americans is not dead. I know the debt is real. The moral argument is airtight. But the political climate right now makes meaningful movement towards this goal nearly impossible. We are in a moment where this government is not capable of reckoning with that. We are in a moment where this government is actively First of all, this government is actively running a con using our language to pay its own people with our tax dollars. So I think that we stay in a posture of demand. I don't think that we abandon it, right? I think we stay organized. We stay dialed into what's happening politically and legislatively, because if we ever manage to pull this country back from the path that it is on, we need to be positioned for that conversation. And at the same time, we cannot let the reparations demand be the ceiling of our strategy. We cannot spend the next decade waiting for a declining hostile empire to repair what it broke while the rest of the world is reorganizing without us. So the both and of this is fight for what we're owed, yes, and build what we need at the same time, because the world is literally not waiting for America to get it right before it moves. So let me try to land the plane somewhere on this, because as I said before I even started, just doing the research can piss me off, right? So let me land this plane. Let me get concrete, because I do believe that this has to land somewhere. I don't like to leave floating conversations, right? So what does economic repositioning actually look like for Black Americans, right? It starts with building relationships, not, not when the shift has already completed, right? Before that, the African Free Trade Agreement, right? The African Continental Free Trade Area is 54 countries. It's 1.3 billion people. It's the fastest growing middle class on the planet. That's what's happening over right now in Africa. The youngest population, massive renewable energy resources that the world needs. And West African, there is a, I'm sorry, what I'm trying to say, that there's opportunity that's happening right now. Right? We have to look at the entirety of the market. And no country, no region is waiting anymore. It's not to say that things like US sanctions don't matter. It's not to say that there's not economic harm that the US can still do. But countries are starting to move forward anyway. They're starting to take on the risk of the legal battle or the cutoff from IMF or the move and the shift around, right? They're taking that risk little by little. We're seeing it happen all across the world. I think that Black Americans, at the end of the day, I think that we hold something that Chinese investors, right, or Russian investors, they can't buy, and that's cultural connection. We have diaspora credibility, right? The ability to walk into rooms across the continent and across the Caribbean as people with a shared history, with shared blood, with shared struggle, and that is not symbolic, right? That is a strategic asset if we position it correctly. And understanding what de-dollarization means for your savings and for your business and for your pricing is not an abstract situation, right? This is practical financial literacy for the world that is literally happening and coming and being built right now. The building of these international relationships that make all of this possible is going to require for us to be in rooms where those relationships are being formed. And I want to take a moment here to talk about the partnership that I joined in on with the Go Global group, right? That is what Go Global is. There is a conference that is happening September 30th through October 3rd in Atlanta. And this is not a networking event. This is early positioning, showing up before the shift is completed so that we are not scrambling to catch up after it does. I will have the link for that in the description. But I want to encourage you, if you are in Atlanta or can get to Atlanta September 30th through October 3rd, that you be in the room. This is the DuBois question updated for the moment that we are actually in, right? Like, not how do I survive double consciousness, but how do I use both identities as leverage? How do you use your Americanness, which gives you a passport and access to capital and credibility in certain rooms, and your Blackness, which gives you cultural connection, Pan-African solidarity, and access to rooms that American citizenship alone cannot open? How do we use both and let neither one be our ceiling? I think the Sahel has showed us what it looks like to consolidate under pressure and to diversify dependencies, to build institutions instead of just demanding from the ones that were designed to exclude you, to learn to control your own narrative. And I will add that I have been building and working on not only my own body of work, but frameworks that help to apply these lessons, right? We are not helpless in this moment. We are not without options. We are without urgency. We are without urgency. I don't feel that from us, but that's something that we can change. The world is reorganizing and power is moving. And the question is not whether the shift happens. The question is, where will we be standing when it does? And so with that, if this conversation landed for you, come find me on Substack. That is where I go deeper. That is where my frameworks are. And greater breakdown and analysis for longer thinking that is not going to fit inside of this YouTube video. The link is in the description, and I would encourage you to like this video if it added something for you and how you see this moment. Please share it with someone who needs to be in this conversation. And of course, please subscribe so that you are here when the next one comes. And until that time, I'm Jice Johnson, and I will see you in the next one.